Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Ramishnapada Pramsava Jakacharya Shadashata Srimad, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki. This ISKCON founder Charya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jaya Vishnupada Pramsava Jakacharya Prasota Shata Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki. Grantha Raja Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Nitai Gaur Pramanande Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 16, entitled King Chitraketu Meets the Supreme Lord. Text number 7. Nityasya artasya sambandho hi anityo drishyate nirshu yavadyasya hi sambandho mamatvam tavyad eva hi nityasya artasya sambandho hi anityo drishyate nirshu yavadyasya hi sambandho mamatvam tavad eva hi nityasyartasya sambandho hi anityo drishyate nirshu yavadyasya hi sambandho mamatvam tavad eva hi. Would you like to repeat, Prabhu? Nityasya sambandho yanityo drishyate nishu yavadyasya hi sambandho mamatvam chavadeva hi. Nityasya, of the eternal, artasya, thing, sambandha, relationship, he, indeed, anitya, temporary, drishyate, is seen, nirshu, in human society, yavat, as long as yasya, of whom, he, indeed, sambandha, relationship, mamatavam, ownership, savat, that long, eva, indeed, he, certainly. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. A few living entities are born in the human species, and others are born as animals. Although both are living entities, their relationships are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time. Then the same animal may be transferred to the possession of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the former proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it. But as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. Purport. Aside from the fact that the soul transmigrates from one body to another, even in this life, the relationships between living entities are impermanent, as exemplified in this verse. The son of Chitraketu was named Harshashoka, or jubilation and lamentation. The living entity is certainly eternal, but because he is covered by a temporary dress, the body, his eternity is not observed. Dehosmin yata dehe kumaram yovanam jara. The embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age. Thus, the bodily dress is impermanent. The living entity, however, is permanent. As an animal is transferred from one owner to another, the living entity, who was the son of Chitraketu, lived as his son for some time, but as soon as he was transferred to another body, the affectionate relationship was broken. As stated in the example given in the previous verse, when one has a commodity in his hands, he considers it his, but as soon as it is transferred, it becomes someone else's commodity. Then one no longer has a relationship with it. He has no affection for it, nor does he lament for it. Om Gyanatarmandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshmatavina Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sarigo Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we are continuing with the philosophy being spoken by the son of Chitraketu, who has been returned to his body by the mythic powers of Angira Rishi and Narada Muni. And we read in the last verse about the transmigration of the soul, that at the time of death, if one is not fully Krishna conscious, then one will be put into another material body and have a new mother, a new father, a new country, a new set of family relations, a new home, a new everything. And generally, one does not remember one's old situation when one is transferred to a new one. Of course, it does sometimes happen that a child may remember their previous life. Uh, there are cases even of very detailed information. Uh, I've heard of one case where a man, after his wife died in a car crash, uh, got a phone call, and it was a child's voice on the other end of the line. And this child told him the PIN number to his credit cards, uh, because this child was his wife who died. But such situations are very rare. Generally, when the living entity transfers from one body to another, he does not remember. And I'll say almost certainly if he transfers from one species to another. Uh, I've never heard of a case of anybody remembering, being a bat in their previous life or something like that. And if that wasn't bad enough, even in this life, the relationships that we make are impermanent. This includes actually even the relationship with our own body. The verse is quoted, Dehos minyata dehe kumaram yovanam jara. I've heard my Guru Maharaj make the point before that, we think of this as growth, going from boyhood to youth to old age. But actually, if one examines it, we are giving up one body and accepting another. The various physiological processes, according to science, even the cells in the body, all sorts of things are actually different. When one takes even just a physical view, the atoms in our body are always being changed out one for another by these various processes. So we cannot even say that, the body that I have now is the same body that I had at 5 years old. But even in this life, and even in this one body, the relationships that we have are impermanent. The example is given here of an animal that is sold. So if I have some possession, of course, not so many people own animals anymore unless they're pets. And people do end up being very attached to their pets. So maybe that is not the best example. But one could take as a more modern example a car. Uh, if I have a car, we're not going to even say my own case. I used to own a van. Uh, and when I was the owner of that van, when it broke down, I needed it repaired or get the oil changed, or there's some issue that affected me, and I had to go through the trouble of maintaining it. But when I sold the van and I transferred the ownership to somebody else, then whether the van needs its oil changed or it has a um, you know flat tire or broken down engine or something, it has nothing to do with me anymore. It does not affect my life if this vehicle that I have sold to somebody else breaks down or not. It's their problem now. Of course, this applies to things that we are willingly separated with, are willingly separated from. If I willingly sell an animal or uh, vehicle or computer or anything, or even if I just renounce it. Uh, there was uh, a case before where I was living in the ashram, and I ended up being able to buy a new computer. And then my old computer, I just donated for the use of the ashram. Then somebody ended up they were drinking something next to the computer and it spilled on it. But because I had given it up, I had a new computer, and it's like, okay, whatever, right? So this idea applies that, we aren't lamenting for these things, applies to things that we have willingly, in one way or another, given up. It doesn't apply so much to things that we are forced to give up, unless we are very, very renounced. Generally, if we are still attached to the various forms of material enjoyment, then we still are jubilant when we obtain them and lament when we do not, or when we either do not obtain them or when they are taken away from us. There are so many examples of these of this thing. One, of course, is the situation that Maharaj Chitraketu finds himself in, of being separated from Harsha, his son. That obviously wasn't a willing separation, and so he was filled with lamentation. Even beyond that kind of intense level of things that we read about in Bhagavatam, we can see many examples, small and large, of this principle at work. It's April, tax season for those people who work are coming up. Uh, and, people are just used to it. But, generally speaking, there is at least a little bit of lamentation. Oh, I'm uh, having to give up some of the money that I have earned in order to pay the government taxes. Uh, of course, we feel even more lamentation in this regard because the government is not properly situated. Uh, democratic governments can never be. Um, but in any case, there's some lamentation. And of course, one of the biggest sources is romantic relationships. Uh, in the sense that one of the greatest forms of lamentation comes from these sorts of relationships. That one becomes very attached to another person. Uh, and it's described that a knot in the heart forms, because of this attraction between man and woman. Of course, previously, one might undergo this lamentation of separation maybe once in their life, because one gets married and then maybe are separated by death, and then one laments. Of course, because of the way that we have set up modern society, one undergoes this lamentation many, many times because of the dating culture that is prevalent in the West. That one gets very, very attached to one person, and then the feelings change as they always do, and you split up. And there's so much lamentation. You think maybe I'll be happy if I have another relationship. I did something wrong uh, that time. I just chose the wrong person. And then one becomes attracted to somebody else, falls in lust, and is very jubilant. And then again, there is lamentation by separation. And then even if one, as I mentioned, comes from a more cultured society where these sorts of things don't happen, one is still separated by death from one's dear ones, one's family, one's friends, one's property, one's community, everything. because all these things are on the platform of sensual enjoyment, on the platform of enjoyment for ourselves. And so they have nothing to do with the actual proper situation of the living entity. When we come into this world and accept a material body, we start to act in ways that mm, increase that false identification with the material body. And so we take on so many designations. I am American, I'm a male, I'm a scholarly person, or, I'm Indian, female, a worker, I am this, I am that, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm young, I'm old, I'm a person who likes chocolate ice cream, I'm a person who likes vanilla ice cream. All these designations we take upon ourselves. And then we start to act in ways that mm, we believe are fulfilling to these designations. I'm an American, so I will act in a way that is suitable for an American, and I will uh, try to implement the world in a way that is suitable for myself. Um, or I'm a rich person, so I'll try to situate the world in a way that is favorable for my own sense gratification. And in all of these ways, we are just acting for our own uh, pleasure, for the gratification of our material senses, which of course will never actually satisfy us because we are not the material body, we are not our material senses. But still, we try again and again to satisfy uh, the material body and the material mind. And whenever we get something new, whenever we find some new form of sense gratification, we become very jubilant. Of course, we tend to forget the amount of work that we had to do to actually get this form of sense gratification. We have a very nice house, a palatial mansion, uh, that, so many square feet, has a pool, has room for 5 cars in the garage, all of these things. But you have to work so hard to afford this sort of thing that by the time one actually returns home, it's very late because one is working overtime, and one is so tired that one more or less immediately goes to sleep. And when one is sleeping, one isn't enjoying a hovel or a palatial mansion because the senses, the external senses, are deadened when asleep. One can't enjoy one's 5-car garage, when one is dreaming of being chased by a tiger or something. So even the jubilation is mixed. And then one is absorbed in lamentation, either by the loss of sense gratification or even by just the effects of the sense gratification in itself. So many forms of sense gratification that we see are mm, extremely detrimental to ourselves and everybody else. we might, or we can see in various ways that sense gratification, we want to enjoy a little bit, but we pay for it later. Especially these days in Kali Yuga, which is predominated by the mode of ignorance, which we read in Bhagavad Gita is poison in the beginning and poison in the end, actually. But even in the mode of passion, which is the other prominent mode in the Kali Yuga, it's like nectar in the beginning, but still it's poison in the end. There are a few emblematic examples of this. One is, of course, intoxication to various substances. It's like very joyous in the beginning. One can just forget all one's worries. I am, free and high or drunk or tripping or all of these things. One can forget one's anxieties. It's like, oh, the world isn't so bad after all. I can, talking with your friends, just enjoying. But then, even in the short term, the hangover comes. And then the hankerings come, the jonesing for whatever one's intoxicant of choice is. And eventually, uh, one's are in the middle uh, time frame, one's relationships starts to deteriorate. Maybe one's job, one can't work as well because of the uh, mm, attachment to intoxication. Uh, then, of course, in the late stage, one's body just begins to totally shut down from the effects of these substances. And then even if one keeps having it, the very substance itself becomes a source of lamentation. So in that case, we can see what is uh, what was once a source of jubilation. Even in its presence, it becomes a source of lamentation. But one is so attached to it, one cannot give it up. The other emblematic example of this principle is, of course, what has been called the king of sense gratification, which is sex life. That when one enters into some relationship, uh, especially if that relationship is outside the bounds of Dharma, then one is very jubilant uh, and uh, allows oneself to become totally bewildered uh, in this regard. But then, so many ways later, the lamentations start to come. Of course, one might, as I was talking about earlier, end the liaison uh, with one's partner, which, or more specifically speaking, the partner might end the liaison with you, and then the lamentation comes. But just like in the mm, case of intoxication, in many cases, if one is looking for fulfillment in the realm of sex life, one won't find it. And so, just like drugs or alcohol, one may search for more and more and more. And that's when things start to become very complicated. Uh, so there are so many ways that this can go wrong. Of course, example that is brought up a lot is that sometimes there are extramarital affairs among people. The husband comes home, finds his wife in bed with somebody else, and then kills both of the participants in the affair and sometimes himself as well. And even if he doesn't kill himself, then he goes to prison forever. Uh, and of course, the lamentations beyond of unrestricted sex life are, of course, extremely prevalent. When it's just obvious in our societies that now, and there's so many mm, sexually transmitted diseases. Of course, there's unwanted pregnancies as well, which the Bhagavad Gita would categorize as Varna Sankara, uh, which affects the social makeup of society, and thus the social fabric it becomes degraded. Uh, and then, of course, in one's personal life, one is carrying all these attachments for all of these different people who you have nothing to do with now, but the mind still thinks, uh, oh, this person, that person. And then because there's an attachment there. And, one might think, these various examples, I'll just have a little bit of sense gratification. I'll indulge a little bit, and it won't get so intense. I'll just act a little bit for my own sense gratification, uh, and and then I'll enjoy, but I won't have the bad parts. Because this is the cheating that we like to do. We want the good parts of the sense gratification. We don't want the bad parts. But that's not the way sense gratification works. Engaging with the material energy, it's not like stairs. It's like a slide. Stairs, I can walk upstairs, hang out on one step for a while, go back down, hang out there, then walk back up. And then, I might not go all the way to the bottom, but I might not go all the way to the top. But, I can just be comfortable. But that's not the way the material energy works. It's like a slide. Once you take one step onto a slide, it's very difficult to get back to the top again. Uh, and this is the way that that this consciousness of I'll enjoy for myself uh, works. Is that once we start down the road, saying, okay, I'll enjoy for myself, it's very difficult to reverse the direction. And then one ends up totally bewildered by the material energy. And will go again and again, trying to absorb oneself in some new form of sense gratification that will never satisfy one. One is not satisfied by this form of sex, so they'll try another form of sex and another form of sex and another form of sex. One is not satisfied by this intoxicant, so they'll try this other intoxicant, another intoxicant, another intoxicant, or more quantity of that intoxicant. And the only difference is how far you slid down the slide uh, before you are unable to just do that activity anymore, either by loss of virility or by death. So we should be very careful with the sense gratification. Of course, not everybody is able to immediately come to the platform of total renunciation of sense gratification. So we mm, put it into uh, boundaries. This is the laws of Dharma. That, okay, you have some attachment for these objects of the senses, and you aren't able to give them up. So try to enjoy them in a restricted way. That's part of the slowly climbing back up the slide. is engaging in these things in a regulated way. Uh, you might have some attachment for sex life. Okay, get married and then have children. You might have some attachment for good eatables. Okay, but restrict to things in the mode of goodness. Not that you have this slaughterhouse culture. Or even if one is attached to meat, one still doesn't have the slaughterhouse culture. One can, sacrifice a goat to Kali or something once a month. But still, in all of these things, uh, we shouldn't think that it gets rid of the problem of sense enjoyment or the problems that come from it. It might minimize the problems. The problems that one faces by following dharmic sense enjoyment, one could say, are certainly far less than by unrestricted sense enjoyment. But there's no way to end the mm, miseries that come by engaging with the objects of the senses in a mood of sense enjoyment. Well, the only way to actually become free from all of these things is to give up this propensity of gratifying our own senses and focus only on gratifying the senses of Krishna. This is Krishna consciousness. To mm, work only for the sense gratification of Krishna. And in this way, we can actually be satisfied because that is our constitutional position, that we are eternal servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when we act in that way, we are actually fulfilling our Sanatana Dharma, uh, the eternal Dharma of the living entity, which is to become a servant. So we should mm, give up this idea of trying to enjoy our own senses. Of course, if the uh, pushings are there very strongly, there are dharmic ways to deal with some desires at least, and we can take advantage of those. But the focus overall from our life should be uh, serving Krishna. And if we have to, fulfill these sense enjoyments, things, because we are so attached to them, okay, just do it in a dharmic way, get it over with, and then get on with your life. But always be meditating on how can I act to please Krishna's senses. So we have about 15 minutes left for discussion or questions, etc. So I'll end here. As our in-person attendee. Any comments or questions?
It seems like us getting attached to these designation
Hmm.
is the beginning, the slide down. But there's so many things that we kind of have to, like roles we have to act in, like
Hmm.
Brahmachari, husband, and then when you're working a job, like
Yes.
you're scientist, seems very easy to subtly start to identify with at least one of them.
Hmm.
So how do you know as you go about your different roles that you're starting to identify with some designation in a way that's gonna cause problems later on?
If you are acting beyond the boundaries of Dharma, these Dharmic things, right? These Dharmic ideas are there because we have body identification. We are all just purely Krishna conscious. There'd be no need for Dharma, right? Because we would all just act on the platform of loving Krishna all the time. And there wouldn't have to be these rules and regulations. So yeah, we do have these material designations. You know, oh, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a brahmachari, I'm a grihasta, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a software engineer, I'm, yeah, whatever. If we, and the propensities for sense enjoyment in those roles might be there. Even in the brahmachari ashram, which is supposed to be very renounced, might come pride or, I am so renounced or all of these things. Uh, but if we always act or try as much as possible to act in accordance with Dharma, uh, then it's a process of gradual purification. So hopefully that answers something. All right, Agari Krishna Prabhu, I see your virtual hand.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much
Prabhu.
for very insightful class.
Thank you.
So my question relates to um, is there in your study of astrology, I'm just seeing a pattern in terms of dharmic sense gratification. Hoi, sorry, there's a cow who's on the street. Um, in terms of dharmic sense gratification, the cycle is every 30 days. Like you're citing the example of regulated meat eating with regard
Mm,
to slaughtering a goat. So, and we follow a lunar calendar, which also cycles, every 29 days or so.
mm,
And then we've also seen in the last 75 years of uh, research in neurochemistry that if you want to change the reward pathways in the brain, you basically have to give up um, the drug, so to speak, or the thing that's you attach to the compulsive behavior that is triggering the release of dopamine. You have to give it up for a minimum of 21 days, which is like
mhm.
when you go to like a rehab. But usually 30 days is like a good amount. And
Yeah.
then you can actually become sober and make a decision. So my question relates to uh, that is the reward pathways in our brain, are they influenced by the lunar cycles?
Uh, yeah. So if you're asking from the astrological perspective, the moon is the karaka or indicator for the mind, uh, which of course is generally expressed through a brain uh, in our form of life. So yeah, you could make the case that mm, yeah, there's probably some connections there. That'd be an interesting thing to look into. The connections between, the neuroscience of addiction and Jyotish and all of these things. So yeah, there probably is some connection there. I can't say too much details because I haven't studied the connections between these different fields so much. But it's an interesting research project.
Yeah, because if you think about it, I mean, it's a reasonable hypothesis that
Yeah.
if our happiness into stress is being controlled by higher order living entities,
Hmm.
the idea of predestination, and that even an astrologer can predict what kind of material happiness into stress you'll have, just simply by looking at the celestial position. Obviously, the celestial position is also being influenced by the cycles.
Mm.
In this case, we're talking about lunar cycles. So it makes sense that one could actually even predict, yeah, in terms of your happiness and distress and your ability
Yeah.
to tolerate and not tolerate.
Hmm. Yeah. So thank you for the comment. That would be something I'll have to look into more. It's very interesting intersection. Madhupan Leela.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thanks for the nice
Haribo.
class. I was just thinking this analogy you gave of the slide is nice. It's very nice. It reminds me of an analogy that um, Gurudev says he has one class and he calls it like the submarine theory. That
Mm.
people they think like, oh, I'll just go down a little bit, and Maya convinces you like, yeah, you'll be fine. You can just come back up, and then you go down like a little bit more and a little bit more, and then you realize like, oh, I'm at the bottom of the ocean. How did that happen? So I was wondering, in the same sort of theme that if you're like you're maybe you feel like you're kind of going down the slide a little bit and you're like, I feel like I'm sliding a little bit in my bhakti and I'm going down. How do you like quickly climb back up? Because slides can be kind of slippery to climb back up. So I'm wondering if you have anything you can share on that.
Yeah. So of course, like the specific things depend exactly on what the form of sense gratification that one is meditating on, engaging in, or actually engaging in. But in general, the mm, one can always take a guidance from senior devotees, uh, especially I would say senior devotees who are very into, I don't say very into, who one can see practice austerities very well because they generally have uh, different view from other people in regards to material enjoyment. And then, even if one does have these very strong material attachments, one can filter one's behavior through the lens of Dharma. Uh, because Krishna has given us the Vedic injunctions, the various rules of Dharma, for gradual purification. Not everybody can jump straight to pure devotional service. Uh, so if one is acting on these bodily designations or wanting to act on these bodily designations, then one can do so in a regulated way uh, and offer the results to Krishna. That it's coming to the platform of karma yoga. I'm attached to acting in a certain way. So I will uh, act in that way, but uh, give the results to Krishna. So yeah, those are that's my general thoughts. Exactly what to do in specific situations depends on the specific form of sense gratification one is hankering after. So hopefully that is an answer that is somewhat satisfying at least. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. So, all right, in the last few minutes, are there any other comments or questions?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
I will.
Thanks for another engaging class.
Thank you.
That the Madhupana Leela's question was what now?
What was that?
What was the last question?
The last question was basically if you feel yourself starting, with the to go down the slide as far as the analogy that I gave. What to do, basically how to stop it before it starts, in a certain sense. If you feel yourself starting to engage or meditate or move towards the side of sense gratification, what to do to put a stop to it.
Yeah. I would say that the thing to do then is to immediately chant Hare Krishna, um, to absorb oneself in devotional service one way or another. Well, once you start down that slide, you cannot get back up without the help of an exalted devotee, spiritual master, or some other very elevated devotee. By the mercy of a great devotee, you can be elevated, you can be rescued from that downward slide. But otherwise, it's a process of bondage. When you're bound, you can't unbind yourself. You need the help of someone else. But the nature of sense gratification is that it is it's like flypaper or a spider's web. You get entangled, and the more you struggle to extricate yourself, the more entangled you become. So it's not something that you can get yourself out of without help. So best not to get yourself stuck at all. And you certainly don't want to make the mistake of thinking that I can dip in a little bit and then extricate myself without getting really deeply entangled. That's the mistake that everyone in the material world made at some point or other. That's why we're all here. But there, as you pointed out, Dharma, prescribed duty, it acts like guardrails that enable you to take a dip into the realm of sense gratification in a regulated and restricted way, and provided you are firmly attached to the rules and regulations of prescribed duties and you don't deviate, then you are somewhat protected. You can go through the process and come out the other side, not entirely unscathed, but you'll come out the other side. So you have some element of protection there when you stick very strictly to prescribed duty. If you deviate from that, or if you follow loosely, that will not work. You'll wind up taking a deep dive. But better than all of this, of course, is you just transcend the whole mess, rather than, as you say, trying to cheat the system, trying to get some sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the goose that lays a golden egg. So you want the end that produces the golden eggs, but you don't want the end that you have to feed. So if you cut the head off to eliminate the end that you have to feed, then you lose everything. But the nature of sense gratification is that it never ever comes without a steep price. For every little smidgen of sense enjoyment, there is corresponding suffering always. And the greater the enjoyment, the greater the suffering. The major element of the illusion of material life is that people don't associate the pain and suffering with the enjoyment, because they don't necessarily come simultaneously. Sex life means suffering. People don't see it that way. They think sex life means enjoyment, but it doesn't. Sex life means pain, invariably, always severe pain. When you understand that, you see the world very differently. We're
Yeah.
out of time. Hare Krishna.
Haribol. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai Shri Shri Radha Damodar.